All right. Peace and greetings, YouTubers. So welcome to another edition of In the News. Let's just jump right into it. I want to start with the recent release of the new docuseries entitled Hurricane Katrina, Race Against Time. This is available on Hulu as well as Nat Geo. It has 5 episodes. I'm actually 3.5 episodes in, so I'll definitely talk about this a bit more in depth on the next live. So for those who are subscribed, this is your heads up. We will likely be talking about this docuseries on the live. So now that I've told you, don't come on there with an attitude because you think I ruined the experience for you because we started talking about the docuseries, right? Just a heads up. But what I will say is, so far from what I've seen, the docuseries does a great job of painting the picture and sitting in the moment. And I say that because in 2025, we are a very fast society, right? Society moves on so quickly. We're in a space where there can be a catastrophe on a Monday morning, and by Monday afternoon, everybody's tweeting about Love Island or whatever else is going on, or whatever politician has done something that's off the chain, or some other crazy catastrophe that's taken place. And it's because we now receive information so much faster. So information is kind of like a game of whack-a-mole, where there's just all these different stimulants and triggers that pop up within the hour. And so it's really hard for society to sit and stay in a moment, which is why politically the United States is a mess right now. Another conversation for a different topic. But I think with this docuseries, it really highlights just how different the world was in 2005 when it came to receiving information. I think folks have to understand, this is before social media was really what it is now. When you take something like a Twitter, which actually did not exist during Hurricane Katrina, there was no way for a lot of information to happen in real time. Our cell phones didn't work the same way. We didn't have smartphones. Information moved a little bit slower. Society was still dependent upon mainstream media. When you compare it to the now, I always just think about the plane crash that took place in DC at the top of 2025. You know, before mainstream media even had an opportunity to put a ticker at the bottom of the screen or make a breaking news announcement, social media had already figured out that there was a commercial jetliner that had crashed with something over the river right off the side of 295 across the water from Reagan Airport. And in those 30 minutes, they figured out it was a commercial airliner. They figured out the airline. They figured out the flight number, and they figured out what time that flight was supposed to land and where it was coming from. That was all before there was a breaking news announcement. That kind of thing didn't happen in 2005 because technology just was not there yet. And so when we're talking about 2005, you know, Twitter wasn't a thing. Facebook is not the Facebook that it is now. As a matter of fact, this is when Facebook still required a college email address to even make an account. So the majority of people who were even using Facebook at the time were college students that were networking. Most people were using MySpace, but MySpace was more so something for younger demographics, and most of the people on MySpace were not talking about events in real time. You know, they're arguing about who's their top 8 on their friends list. They're doing the coding to make sure that the music can play on their page and that the graphics will scroll down and around on their page, right? YouTube is brand new. It's just come out that February. This is now August of 2005. We don't even have smartphones that can kind of capture video and graphics the way that they do now. Yeah, we had those Motorola's and Nokias, but it was just a different space. So when we're talking about what was happening and what it was like for the people in the Gulf region affected by the storm, there was no, let me grab my iPhone 16 and tweet out, hey, I'm on my roof, I need help. There was nothing. Right? God willing, you had a good cell phone with some decent, I think this is when we were still using 3G. I think this is when it was 3G service. And so the idea of just painting the picture, right? Society moves on so quick that we also sometimes desensitize the significance of things that take place. So when you hear that number 1,833 as far as those who were those who perished, it's so easy for people to just brush it over in a quick umbrella term because there are so many tragedies that take place. But what I always say in these moments is that all 1,833 of those people were somebody that had a story. These are all people that did something that significantly impacted somebody else's life. These are people that did something that contributed something to society. Even if you weren't there to experience or be on the receiving end of it, all these people served a purpose. And so because society now tends to brush over tragedy and kind of blanket statement everything, the documentary, again, puts you back into the space of what was it like to be there? What was it like to not really know what's happening? What was it like to be in a period of uncertainty where you don't know if it's life or death, right? And so it really paints that picture. It gives you the narrative and the stories of the people who were there. And not only just the people who were there, but the people from the outside looking in who didn't really know what was happening. Somebody like me, I was in high school living on the West Coast. And so all I could get was what was presented by mainstream media at the time, right? And so, again, I think so far it's done a great job of really just kind of resetting what that narrative is, because we're also in an era where people like to rewrite history. People like to either downsize different things. We're now in a space where officials who are in charge are getting rid of archives and historical documents to try to restructure and change narratives to fit whatever political viewpoint they want to have. That's the world we're living in now. So I always say different, presentations and documentaries like this, or when the levees broke, or Katrina babies, these are important and they're vital because, again, they make sure that the stories are always told. Because you got to think about it. Like, there are neighborhoods that were never rebuilt. There are entire neighborhoods that were washed away where not a single original resident came back. And so with that erasure of those neighborhoods, those streets, those are stories, those are legacies, that's lineage, that's history, never to be seen or heard from again. So it's important that we document these things. So anyway, to get off my soapbox, definitely check out the series. If you thought that was in depth, wait till we get to the live. We'll talk about it more on the next live. Anyway, moving on. I did want to take a moment to talk about some of the changes that are taking place in the award show landscape, specifically award shows that are marketed and targeted to people who look like me, right? So as we see, it's been announced that award shows like the Soul Train Awards or the BET Hip Hop Awards are pretty much indefinitely on a hiatus until they can figure out how to rebrand and remarket them. So I do want to read this segment from an interview with the CEO of BET. Can you confirm the chatter that two of the annual shows in BET's award franchise, Soul Train and Hip Hop, are no longer being presented? I would say that it's less about them being no longer and more about our team having to reimagine them for this changing media landscape that we find ourselves in. I think what we're going to see are more people taking franchises and saying, this might have started on linear television, but now I'm going to move it to another space. Do I move it to streaming or do I move it to another platform? So for BET Linear, we have suspended the Soul Train and Hip Hop Award shows, but we have a team that's actively thinking about where those award shows might best live as the media climate continues to evolve. They aren't gone. And we also have the NAACP Image Awards and the Stella Awards. I think this paints a bigger picture of the award show industry in general, and that's mainly because music has just shifted in the way that we consume it and what we're entertained by. Music, in my opinion, is no longer a collective experience, and this is why there's a lack of interest from the general public, because when you're being honest, viewership is down with all the award shows. It's not just the Soul Train Music Awards or the BET Hip Hop Awards or the BET Awards. It's the Grammys. The AMAs had to actually take a gap year. The Billboard Music Awards had to take a gap year. You know, and there's some award shows that don't even exist anymore. And I guarantee you the VMAs, again, will have low ratings this year. And it's because the purpose and the space where music once set within society's collective experience has shifted. It's no longer as much of a priority because people have kind of repurposed where they place music, especially as we get into the later generations. For a generation like mine or those who came before, we grew up in a space where when you got ready for school, you were playing music videos in the morning. And when you got home from school, you had music videos playing while you were doing your homework. When friends came over, you might have had BET or MTV or BET Soul or VH1 Soul or The Box, all these different networks kind of playing in the background while your friends hung out. When you still listened to the radio because you wanted to hear the exclusive of whatever song was dropping. There was just all these different options. And as technology has changed and shifted, and there was the emergence of YouTube and people could go and watch whatever they wanted when they felt like watching it, it kind of killed the purpose of shows like a TRL or a 106 in Park. And gradually over time, as the music networks like a BET or VH1 or MTV shifted more into reality television and music was no longer that priority, we kind of saw the erasure of music on television. And then this bled right into radio because people started to change how they consume music, because now there was Spotify, there was Tidal, there was Apple Music, there's Pandora, people listen to podcasts, right? People will go on a whole road trip and play a podcast before they listen to music sometimes. And so just the overall relevance of how music used to be consumed has changed. And so this is reflected with the viewership of award shows. How do you expect people to get excited about an award show when they don't even know what's happening musically? Most people can't tell you who's in the top 10 on the Billboard right now, in comparison to 30 years ago, where even if you didn't pay attention to the charts, if something was sitting in the top 10 on the Billboard Hot 100, you most likely still knew the song because you heard it somewhere. You heard it in a grocery store. You heard it on radio. You heard it in passing. It's something that everybody kind of listened to. It's just a different day and space. People have options, and those options have kind of diluted the space and the relevance of where music is in 2025. And so a lot of people just no longer have the same interest. And this is why award shows, in my opinion, have just really been kind of falling off the bone when it comes to ratings. And then when we talk about just the cross-generational appeal, I think a lot of the award shows did a terrible job of making sure that they keep everybody across the board happy. When I was coming up, I was in that era where you watched an award show as a family because there was somebody from my era, there was somebody from my parents' era, somebody might have been on there that my grandma still liked. That isn't really a thing. Now, I will say the Soul Train Awards, in my opinion, personally was one of the best award shows that was out there when you wanted to actually hear real singing. And I will also say Soul Train Awards always did a really good job of that cross-generational appeal, where they paid homage to those that were a bit more seasoned, they paid homage to those that were kind of transitioning into the seasoned realm, and they made sure that they still gave a lot of attention to what was current. And so for a lot of black entertainers that, you know, were in R&B or hip-hop or whatever, a lot of times when they weren't welcome into spaces like the Grammys or the AMAs or the VMAs, the Soul Train Awards was always there, right? And so I will also say what also sucked is where the Soul Train Awards, in my opinion, sometimes suffered is a lot of our A-listers, I'm talking about our A-listers, often chose not to show up. You know, a lot of them didn't go to these awards shows. A lot of them were never present. They'd win all these awards and never be there because their priority was the VMAs or the Grammys or some of the larger award shows. And unfortunately, an award show that once gave us a space to make sure that we were included when other folks kind of pushed us out ends up becoming collateral in the moment because the ratings are too low. And so that's another thing that I think, you know, honestly sucks. If I could say when was the last really good year for award shows where they still were relevant, to me it would have been 2009. Now I know that sounds a way back, and some folks may say, oh, there were some years that were good, but I think 2009 was one of those last years where award shows across the board still had an element of relevance. And again, that idea of cross-generational appeal, where they didn't just appeal to one demographic, but anybody could still watch, right? And even 2009 would have been a slowdown compared to what was happening in the 90s or even the early 2000s. But, you know, I just think times have shifted. And unfortunately, what is sad when you're talking about something like, again, like the Soul Train Awards, it serves the same purpose as award shows like the Stellar Awards or the Trumpet Awards or the NAACP Awards, where, again, giving exposure and outlets to a lot of black entertainers that don't always get it from the VMAs or the AMAs or the Billboard Awards or the Grammys. And so it's kind of sad to see where that goes. Hopefully they're able to figure out what the next move is. But I will say, I think the idea of pulling it from the BET linear, and what they're saying is, you know, they have the BET Plus app where you can watch stuff on the app and everything, but I think even that kind of alienates some generations because there are some people that are a bit older that don't do all of the different apps and everything. They're still doing cable, and what's on cable is what they're going to watch. So I will say, especially with something like the Soul Train Awards that already pulls in an older demographic, it is a real gamble to only put it on some other platform like, oh, you got to watch it online or you got to watch it on BET Plus, right? Who knows where that will go? And it even goes to show that award shows in general, the viewership has been so down to the point where look at what Viacom does with all of their award shows, where if you have the VMAs or the BET Awards, it airs on every Viacom network. So the BET Awards are coming on Nickelodeon, it's coming on CBS, it's coming on BET, it's coming on MTV, it's coming on VH1. Like, it just goes to show that, you know, they are doing everything they can to try to hold on to viewers, but people just don't consume as much television either, right? The landscape has changed. And so, you know, who knows? But I will say one award show to still definitely get behind and support is Black Music Honors, which I think right now has really been kind of holding it down with regard to giving entertainers an opportunity to have that space. So a lot of times where there's those black entertainers that sometimes only get exposure on adult R&B radio and sometimes can barely get that, at least BET, or not BET, but Black Music Honors Awards, that award show will give them a stage to perform on. And so as times change, I always say the idea is to still be in community. So the things that we value or the things that are important to us, we still need to make sure we hold on to and make sure that we give platforms to, so that these different artists or the things that we care about culturally are still relevant, at least to us, right? We just can't let the people up top erase all of our experiences. And so we'll see what happens with that. I'm kind of bummed because if you follow me, you know the Soul Train Awards was my favorite award show to follow and review because, again, that was the award show where the singers showed up. And again, this was an award show that's been out since 1987. With the erasure of so many award shows, the handful that are left, you know, for a lot of artists, this is their one opportunity to expand to a new audience. And so we'll see how this goes. Anyway, moving on. Now, can we talk about what's happening in the state of Texas? Because there is a lot going on. All right, let's go to the clip.
He's trying to get sound bites, and he has no legal mechanism. And if he did, subpoenas from Texas don't work in New York. So he's going to come get us how? Subpoenas in Texas don't work in Chicago. He's going to come get us how? I was on the redistricting committee, and I was wondering in January, why am I on the redistricting committee? I mean, it ain't a redistricting year. And we didn't meet once, right? But this was always the backup plan. And let me be clear. The districts that are targeted overwhelmingly are black districts, okay? They are pitting Jasmine Crockett against Mark Vesey, and they are pitting Al Green against CD18, where there's a black representative. If you don't know who sat in CD18, I live in CD18, by the way, Barbara Jordan, Mickey Leland, Craig Washington, Sheila Jackson Lee, and Sylvester Turner.
Now, this is in response to the arrest warrants that were issued for the more than 50 Democratic lawmakers from the state of Texas that actually left the state as a way to protest and prevent the attempted redistricting and redrawing of congressional maps in the state of Texas. Now, why does this matter and who cares? Well, listen, it matters because this is something that actually affects all of us whether or not we live in the state of Texas, mainly because it plays a role when it comes to the balance of power in the House. So when we're talking about how laws are passed on a federal level, when something needs to be signed off by the president cannot sign off on a new law until it has been passed in both the House and the Senate. The Senate has 100 members. Those 100 members represent the 50 states. Each state has 2 senators. That's how we get our Senate. Now, when it comes to the House is a little bit more complicated because it is a larger body. There are 435 members of the House. The House is representative of the 435 congressional districts that exist in the United States. Since 1929, there have been 435 congressional districts. Now, how these congressional districts are drawn is actually up to the state legislatures of each state. So just like how there is a House on the federal level and a Senate on the federal level, every state aside from Nebraska, which kind of has its own system, has their own state house. And in their state house, they have the upper chamber. The upper chamber are the state senators. Then they also have the lower chamber, which is also sometimes called the House of Assembly, the House of Delegates, or the House of Representatives. Once the state legislature votes and agrees upon a new district when it comes to drawing these districts on the congressional map for specifically their state, it then goes to the governor to be signed off, and then those districts become law or become legitimized, and they fall into that conversation of the 435 congressional districts on that national platform. Now, let's take a picture of like Montana. So Montana has 2 congressional districts. From the outside looking in, you would assume that more people live in the eastern portion of the state because that district is larger than the district on the left side. However, these 2 districts have the exact same amount of people within their representative spaces because one of the rules when it comes to redistricting is that each district is supposed to have the same amount of people represented. So in this map of Montana, both of these districts have about 556,000 people. Now, this is where the state of Texas comes into the conversation. In order to have power in the House, you need to have a majority of 218 seats represented out of that 435. As of August of 2025, Republicans are in power because they have 219 seats. Democrats have 212, and there are 4 vacancies because we've had people die in office. I'll save that piece for another conversation. And so I say all that to say, right now, Republicans can pretty much pass everything as long as they don't have 5 people that flake off. Now, to go even further, Republicans have an opportunity to gain 5 additional seats by gerrymandering the state of Texas and redrawing those district maps. Because what's interesting is, this is not a census year. Normally the maps are drawn and redrawn every 10 years during census after they have a survey of what the population looks like. However, Governor Abbott and even the Trump administration said, hey, actually, go ahead and do that special session now and we'll redraw them right now. And so let's just put a little bit more context in. To pick up new seats, Republicans have proposed to pack more Democratic voters into districts in the state's blue urban centers, giving Democrats even bigger margins in districts they already control, such as those represented by Crockett, Representative Joaquin Castro in San Antonio, and Representative Sylvia Garcia in Houston. And they're looking to disperse Republican voters from safely red districts into several districts currently represented by Democrats, such as the ones held by Johnson and Kazar. No Republican incumbents' districts were made significantly more competitive. The map drawers managed to move more Republican voters into Democratic districts around Dallas and Houston without imperiling the nearby seats of GOP representatives Beth Van Dyne of Irving and Troy Nehls of Fort Bend. Both faced competitive races in 2020 before their districts were redrawn in 2021 to become solidly Republican, and neither was made to sacrifice those gains in the state house's initial map. Among the new majority black districts is the 18th Congressional District, centered in Houston, which has been represented by a decades-long run of renowned black Democratic members, including Barbara Jordan, Mickey Leland, Sheila Jackson Lee, and most recently Sylvester Turner, whose death in March left the seat vacant. The map proposes to pack even more Democratic voters into the solidly blue seat. Harris won the district with 69% in 2024 and would have carried it with 76% under the new boundaries. Now, on your screen is an example of gerrymandering, and it highlights how, based on how you draw borders, it can dictate whether or not somebody is in power or whether somebody loses power. This is what's happening in the state of Texas. As of right now, when we're talking about the Texas State House, Republicans are in power. And because of this, they have an opportunity to redraw congressional maps. And if they have their way, they will gain 5 additional GOP seats for the federal side when we're talking about the House and the Senate. So when we're talking about that House where Republicans have a 219 majority, that majority could possibly jump up to 224. This gives Republicans even more power to push their laws without as much pushback because now they have more numbers represented. So that's kind of where this is centered and what this is about. And when we're talking about gerrymandering, gerrymandering is often centered in the political ideas of the electorate. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times people know exactly what demographics are going to vote for and what they stand behind. That comes into the conversation of socioeconomic wealth. That also comes into the conversation of redlining. The reason we have pockets of certain populations goes back to the conversation of redlining, which I'll get back to in a second. And so when it comes to gerrymandering, a lot of times there are normally 2 approaches that take place with this system. So let's just say let's just say you're somebody in power, right? You're running for office, but there is a district that you know is not going to vote for you, right? They are, at least 80, 90% not voting for you. If you're that person in power and you want to take power from that district, what you do is you see the other surrounding districts nearby and you will redraw the borders to break up that power district that works against you. That way their vote is diluted. That way, they don't carry the same weight. And now this super group of whatever percentage of people that were going to vote against you are broken into 5 or 6 different districts and swallowed into something else. And now they are no longer a threat. So that's one approach. Normally, it's break up a region that's working against you and water them down by diluting them with additional voters that don't share their same political interests. The other approach often is, let's say that we have 2 or 3 or 4 pockets of people that don't vote for you. You know that if you run, you know that when it comes to any legislation, they're going to be in your way. The idea is to put all of them in one district together. That way, maybe because you're not able to manipulate like you did on the other way, but if you put them all in one district, that's the only district that's going to be in the way. They won't have as much power to influence what's happening with other districts. So put them all in one big district. Here's an example. Let's look at the visual. So if you take an example like Maryland's 3rd district, look at the shape of this district. This is clearly something where it's like, okay, well, over here we got some people that's going to be in the way. People up there to the left are going to be in the way. When you go to the top, they're going to be in the way. Put all of them in one big giant district. And then that way, yeah, they got the representation, but outside of that, we don't have to really worry about the other districts because we've gotten our one, what you would say, anomaly out of the way. Keep them all together. That's one approach. Look at what's happening with Texas's 33rd district or Illinois' 4th district, right? You can see that these maps are drawn specifically to target populations of people that have the same voting patterns, that have the same political ideals. Look at what's happening with the 35th district in Texas, or what's happening with Louisiana's 2nd district, right? These are all intentionally created to ensure that, power is not represented across state lines or across a vast majority of the state, but more so locked into one district. Right? That leaves them to only having one representative in the House. Because again, with some of these districts, if these had been broken up or these had not been drawn in the way that they had been drawn, something like Maryland's 3rd district could probably gain 3 or 4 additional representatives based on political power, but instead put them all in the same border. Same thing with Texas and what's happening in Louisiana. This is where the conversation of census also comes in. Now, if you haven't been paying attention, your president recently put out a new status that stated, I have instructed our Department of Commerce to immediately begin work on a new and highly accurate census based on modern day facts and figures, and importantly, using the results and information gained from the presidential election of 2024. People who are in this country illegally will not be counted in the census. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So 2 points. Census takes place every decade. This is a way to get a correct tabulation of what the population looks like. That's why if you go and you try to trace your ancestry, a lot of times, once you get lost in those 1800s or the 1700s, people often look at the census to trace their family because that's the tabulation of who's living where in that specific time in whatever state, in whatever city, right? Census takes place every 10 years. And normally after census has been completed, this is when new districts are redrawn or realigned because now there's a new tabulation on what that population looks like, and whatever party is in power will draw those districts based on what the new map looks like. That's one point. Point number 2. Remember back in 2020 when it was time for census and the Trump administration urged to pretty much shut everything down and they ended census about 15 days early? Why do you think they did that? One, remember our conversation about redlining and how this plays a role as to where populations in the United States live. And again, that plays a role into socioeconomic wealth and also race. And when we talk about voting, two of the biggest factors with how people decide what they're going to vote for sometimes are determined by the race of the voter and also the socioeconomic status of the voter as well as education. That's one part. But two is we also recognize that there are some groups that are undercounted in census and there are some groups that are overcounted. When we talk about the groups that are undercounted, Black residents were undercounted at a rate of about 3.3% in the 2020 census. Native American populations were undercounted at a rate of 5.64% in 2020. The Latino population was undercounted at a rate of 4.99%. White voters had an overcount of 1.64%. And the Asian population had an overcount of 2.62%. So now when it comes to the census, and some of you are asking, why does this matter? Please understand, this is all connected and ties together. So let's just give a hypothetical. Let's say that census has been completed and there's a state whose final number is 1 million people, right? When they are creating the budget to allocate the resources that are needed for the people in that state, that's based on the people who have been counted. So when they're determining how many fire stations there need to be, when they're determining how many libraries need to be built, how many schools need to be built, where they need to allocate the water sources to make sure everybody has access to water, where the hospitals need to be built and how many hospitals need to be there, all these different things. That's based on the number of the 1 million that were there. So when you're talking about 3.3% of Black people being undercounted, and when you take again the Native American population and the Latino population, and it's 4.99% of that hasn't been counted, as well as 5.64% of that hasn't been counted, those people all still use those same resources. So now your resources have been stretched a little bit because they didn't take into account the people that weren't counted. And so when we have a moment like an idea of ending census early for political gain, it actually works against the people collectively, because now we are fighting harder to share the same amount of resources, but these resources are not allocated for the actual population. They're allocated for the population that was counted. And that's why I always say it's important to do census, and also it's a terrible idea when census ends early. But it gets deeper. Let's get a little bit more political here. So now when the politics come into the picture, please understand that when Black citizens are not counted in census or undercounted, it actually benefits the GOP because this plays a role into how the districts are drawn. Remember how we said all the districts need to be the same size? Well, if you have pockets of populations that don't exist because you have a 3.3% or a 4.99% or 5.64%, that means when you're drawing those districts, it's only counting the people who were counted in that number, which means you can manipulate the size of that district based on who you want in it, because they either vote for you or they don't vote for you. So you either push them into another district or you put more of them into yours because it will work in your favor. And so these are things that a lot of people up top who run for office, these are things that they consider. Let's go a bit deeper. Let's take Georgia's district number 5, right? So Georgia district number 5 is in the Atlanta metropolitan area. And I'm going to use a hypothetical. Let's say that we have a candidate that is running for the president of the United States as a GOP candidate. Now, Georgia district number 5, according to census, has a population of 774,627. Of that population, 47.9% of them are Black. And so when we do the numbers, that means that the population that is Black in this area is 371,389. Now let's take into account that 3.3% of people who were undercounted in census. And again, this is a hypothetical because depending on the region, the state, and what part of the United States we're in, that number goes up and goes down, especially when we talk about concentrated areas of Black populations. But just for this example, we're going to stick with the 3.3% of Black people who were undercounted or not counted in census. That means that 371,389 is only 96.7% of the Black population in that area. So when we do the math and we divide by the 0.967, that actually gives us 384,031. So that means that there is a difference of 12,642 people that were not counted in census as far as the Black population. Why does this matter? Well, let's talk about the logistics. When we talk about Georgia district number 5, 70% of eligible Black voters participated in the 2020 election. And so if we were to use that same 70% against the 12,642, that means that there's a possibility that there were an additional 8,849 voters that were not counted in census but may vote in the election. Because please understand, just because somebody is not counted in census or they did not participate in census does not mean that they will not participate in an election. It also doesn't mean that they may vote either, but for this example, we're just saying that there's, again, 8,849 people to consider based on the idea that 70% of eligible black voters in Georgia District 5 participated in the 2020 election. So now we have this number of 8,849. When we look at the numbers, 88% of black voters in this region voted for Joe Biden. That means if we take that 88% against that 8,000 number, that means we're left with 7,787 people. These are just black voters that are likely to vote for the Democratic candidate based on the results of the 2020 election and if we were still in 2020. So when we take that 7,787, that's just Georgia District number 5. What does that mean for the nearby districts of 11, 6, 7, 4, and 13, which are also technically a part, at least in some instances, a part of the Atlanta metropolitan area where people may have these same voting patterns? This is where politics comes into play. As a person who would be in charge of the GOP, I recognize that whoever that GOP candidate is that's running for president may lose in this area terribly. However, if we're able to gerrymander the nearby districts to take away some of that black voting power in those regions and those districts nearby and dilute them with other voters who have opposing political views and kind of saturate them into these districts like 11, 6, 7, 4, and 13, this means that our candidate may lose the general election, but they may pick up seats in the House. Why? Because we can gerrymander, we can redraw districts, and again, because people weren't counted, we can really redraw these districts to work in our favor politically. In addition to that, we can also go and take things to the Supreme Court and try to strip away voting rights, which is exactly what is also happening right now. So going back to that clip, did you notice how she kept talking about district number 18?
And they are pitting Al Green against CD 18, where there's a black representative. If you don't know who sat in CD 18, I live in CD 18, by the way.
So I want you to hold on to that conversation about Texas District 18 because this will all tie together. But going back to what's been happening. So as a result of what Texas is aiming to do with their districts, this has also triggered a response from other governors from different states. So you have the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, saying, okay, Texas, if you guys want to shake the table and gerrymander and create 5 new Republican districts that will give more seats in the House to the GOP, I can do the same with my legislation in the state of California, and we can pick up some Democratic seats. And then Illinois is threatening the same thing. New York is threatening the same thing. When it comes to the conversation of gerrymandering, this has been something that's been taking place in the United States since 1812. Even when we're talking about the states that are the most gerrymandered, you have 11 of them. There's North Carolina, there's Maryland, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Louisiana, Arkansas, Utah, Texas, Ohio, West Virginia, and Wisconsin are the most gerrymandered states in the country. According to the report, Wisconsin is considered the most gerrymandered state in America, although the practice is present in all states. In 2022, voters in Wisconsin elected a Democratic governor, attorney general, and secretary of state. These appointments were unaffected by gerrymandering as they used the statewide vote. However, Republicans maintained a 64-35 and 21-11 majority in the state assembly and Senate, respectively, enabled by Republican-drawn maps that favored its party's candidates in districts across the state. In February, by the way, this article is from 2024, Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers signed new maps into law, which he said would ensure the state will not have the most gerrymandered maps in America. Now, in 2024, the Redistricting Reform Act was introduced to Congress, and 2 of the points that would have been in this bill would have been 1, a ban on mid-decade redistricting, as well as setting up a criteria in relation to what makes it appropriate to redistrict. Now, this bill actually did not pass through Congress because it actually sat and stalled for months and months and months until that session of Congress ended, and then the new session was started after the election with the new people who are now elected into office. And so there's no telling where that bill is. It's kind of just a lost cause at the moment, unfortunately. But getting back to the conversation around District number 18 in Texas. We've talked about this district before, for those who have followed the channel. Remember that guy, Edward Blum? Now, you may not have heard of Edward Blum, but the way that he has shaken the table over the last 30 years politically has played a role into the outcomes and the impact of what happens to each and every one of us just with our daily experiences. So back in 1992, Edward Blum decided he wanted to run for Congress. And so what he noticed is the 18th district of Texas, which is around the Houston metropolitan area, they had a spot where somebody was running unopposed. There was an incumbent Democratic representative named Craig Anthony Washington. And so Edward Blum decided, hey, that's my ticket in the door. I'm going to run over there. So he runs for office. He loses bad. He only gets 32% of the vote. And with his reasoning, he's like, the only reason I lost is because this district is too black. It's been gerrymandered in a way where there's just way too many black folks and they would never vote for me. So I'm going to sue. Which I always found funny because, again, let's take a picture of what these maps look like, right? When you look at what District number 18 looked like back in 1992, it literally models what our redlining did to Houston, right? So when we're talking about redlining and the conversation around FHA loans and as far as black people not being able to get mortgages from the FHA program, remember, redlining created a space where black people weren't allowed to live in every area. Even if you had the money to purchase the property, you were only allowed as a black person to live in the red areas. Green, blue, yellow, don't worry about it. And it was so crazy where if there was an area that was yellow, it didn't necessarily mean that black people lived there. It just meant that it was in close proximity to black folks. So again, that's going to be a problem. So the desired spaces to live in were green and blue. So when you look at the map of what that redlining did to that region around Houston, and then you look at Houston's District number 18, it mirrors the shape of where the red zones were when it came to redlining. And so what I find interesting is somebody like an Edward Blum has been perfectly fine with benefiting from the end result of something like redlining that screwed over a lot of black people, but when the tables turned and he needed it to work in his favor, now he had a problem with the system. Anyway, he goes and he sues, right? He sues. It goes all the way to the Supreme Court in a case called Bush v. Vera. And he actually wins, right? So now you got to go and you got to redo that map. And so what it does is it gives Edward Blum an adrenaline rush. Like, wow, I'm more powerful than I thought I was. And now that I'm at it, I got a few other things I'm mad about. And so for the next 30 years, this man has gone on a vengeful revenge tour, pretty much against black folks. And so there's been other things that have taken place. He has been a part of more than 24 lawsuits that often deal with the conversation of civil rights. And a lot of times, if he is able to get his way with what it is he's suing for, it tends to be something that works against the favor of black Americans. One of the other big lawsuits that he spearheaded was the Northwest Austin Municipal Utility District number 1 v. Holder. The purpose of this lawsuit was to gut Section 4A of the Voting Rights Act. Section 4A of the Voting Rights Act aimed to ban discriminatory practices when it came to voting patterns for at least a period of 5 years, meaning outlawing things like a literacy test in order for people to register to vote. Now, this case took place in 2009, and the Supreme Court voted in favor of Edward Blum's lawsuit by a ratio of 8-1. The only person who was the number one that voted against the stripping of Section 4A was Clarence Thomas. Not because he cared about the rights of voters, but mainly because he said, if we're going after 4A, we need to also go after Section 5 and Section 2A of the Voting Rights Act. So yes, I actually support the stripping of this, but we need to look into the constitutionality of these other segments of the Voting Rights Act. It'd be your own people. At this point, he's really feeling himself, so he keeps the ball rolling. Then we get to 2013, and there's another lawsuit that he's behind, which was Shelby v. Holder. The aspect and the aim of this lawsuit was to strip and gut Section 4B of the Voting Rights Act. Now, Section 4B, pretty much the idea was because at the point in time when we go back to the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the United States federal government was able to identify different states that had a continued pattern of discriminatory practices when it came to black voters and black voter registration. And so because of that, Section 4B was created, and Section 4B was to identify the states that needed to kind of fall under a jurisdiction of the federal government to ensure that they were not screwing people over when it came to voter rights. And so again, the conversation of, is this constitutional? And so when we get to Shelby v. Holder, this too was gutted. And the argument was, racism is over. We're post-racial. Barack Obama's president. Beyonce sells 1 million records. LeBron James wins a lot of championships and everything else like that. And the black kids, they got their HBCUs that they can go to. And so racism doesn't exist anymore. We don't need this section either. And then Section 4B of the Voting Rights Act was stripped down. And this is when we started to see the increase of voter ID laws and all these random draconian laws like making it illegal to give people bottles of water when they're in line to vote in the state of Georgia. All of those protections are now kind of stripped. So we've seen Section 4A get stripped. We've seen Section 4B get stripped. And again, Clarence Thomas was like, yeah, we can get rid of this part. But again, don't forget about Section 2A and Section 5 because those are important. Now, I've already done a video on Edward Blum, so I'm actually just going to add that in the description for those who want to watch it, and I go a bit more in detail about some of his other lawsuits. But again, his work is not stopped. When we talk about the fact that there have been changes when it comes to affirmative action in college admissions, he was behind that lawsuit. When it also comes to the shutting down of the Fearless Fund, he was behind that lawsuit. Again, Fearless Fund was a startup company that aimed at providing resources to black women-owned businesses when it came to venture capital, where they could get $20,000 to $25,000 $25,000 grants for their businesses. They always tell us to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps. So then when people in the community get together and try to pull ourselves up and create things, somebody like an Edward Blum shows up and says, oh, that's racist. That works against all the other groups. What about white women businesses? What about Asian women businesses? What about everybody else? And so boom, that was in litigation back and forth in the system. And eventually Fearless Fund eventually just shut down because of the cost and the conversations around litigation and how expensive everything was. So somebody like Edward Blum has had it out for black folks and it has not stopped. Now, this leads me to my next segment. Supreme Court could be set to end key protection for minority voters. The U.S. Supreme Court escalated the high-stakes redistricting battle in Louisiana by ordering new legal briefings on whether intentionally creating a second majority black congressional district to comply with the Voting Rights Act might violate the U.S. Constitution. The court's order Friday directs both sides to submit supplemental briefs on whether the state's intentional creation of a second majority-minority congressional district violates the 14th or 15th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution. The order suggests that the court's conservative majority could be readying to make a sweeping ruling that creating districts in which minority voters can elect their representatives of choice under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is unconstitutional. If the court rejects the idea that the Voting Rights Act serves a compelling interest, it would become increasingly difficult to protect minority voting power. Previously, the Supreme Court has allowed states some breathing room to consider race when drafting districts to comply with Section 2, as long as race was not the predominant factor. The court's move comes months after a federal court struck down Louisiana's remedial congressional map on the grounds that it was an unconstitutional racial gerrymander, even though the legislature passed it to fix a prior Voting Rights Act violation. In Louisiana, black residents make up nearly 1/3 of the population, yet were previously able to elect candidates of their choice in just one of 6 congressional districts. The creation of a second black majority district was widely viewed as a minimum requirement for fair representation. You see how all of this ties together? Now, one thing that I will say, and I'm not one to be an I told you so, for years I've been talking about the fact that Section 2A and Section 5 would be on the docket when it came to the Voting Rights Act. Case in point. And it's only going to get worse. And like I've told you, the Voting Rights Act is still on the docket. Section 2A is on the docket. And if it's up to Clarence Thomas, he will find a way to go after Section 5 as well. He's still making the argument about the constitutionality of Section 5. He's like, now you see how all of this is tied together? When we talk about Texas and the conversation of gerrymandering, the goal is to strip away the power of the black vote, to limit just how much representation is there, as well as gaining seats in the House where they can further push their agenda as far as what they want to do when it comes to the GOP. There's that conversation. There's the conversation of census and the idea that now all of a sudden the Trump administration wants to kick off another census count 5 years early, mainly because they recognize that, hey, we need to manipulate the numbers even more. Let's use the boogeyman of illegal immigrants to justify why there needs to be another census count. Even though when we had census in 2020, the administration decided to cut it short because they recognized that there will be different groups of people who were undercounted, and this would work in the favor of the GOP. Now we also fast forward to what's happening with voting rights acts. And like I've been saying for years, all of that is on the docket, okay? And here we are again, where again, the constitutionality of the Voting Rights Act keeps getting chipped away piece and section by piece by section. And so, again, when it comes to the conversation of race, like I've always said, nothing is precedent. Don't think just because there has been a gain or two that things are locked in. There's always somebody working double overtime to strip it away. And this is why I always say that for years and years and years, the goal has been to cement the nonsense. Understand that if Texas is successful with gerrymandering and redrawing these districts, there is no representation and no power when it comes to the black voice in the state of Texas at this point, because literally all of these districts are going to be red, minus a handful. Like, this is going to be the end of some political career. Somebody like an Al Green most likely will no longer have a seat in the House. And so these are things to think about when it comes to census. If there are people that are still saying, well, I'm not counting, I'm not doing this, I don't need them watching, seeing what I'm doing. Well, okay, now you're undercounted. This plays a role into what happens politically, because this gives a group like the GOP an opportunity to gain more seats in the House. Because again, they can take care and do what we said as far as manipulating the districts when they draw them and making sure you dilute segments and populations where they feel that people may have too much political power that they don't believe in. And so again, then we get to what's happening with the Supreme Court. We already know the Supreme Court has been on some nonsense ever since, you know, the last 3 have been added to the bench. So be for real. Anyway, this is why I say do not tap out. You have got to stay locked in, because they're doing it right in your face. And while you're getting mad about optics and smaller things that don't really carry any weight, they got a whole system and a whole strategy that's bigger than a lot of us can even imagine. And that's why I say pay attention. In the same way that folks kept saying Project 2025 was a real thing, there were so many who fought everybody and was like, oh no, Trump says he doesn't know nothing about that. Y'all fear mongering. Y'all keep trying to scare everybody to vote for y'all stupid candidate that we don't want to get behind. And here we are. It's been a shit show since January. Anyway, moving on. Okay, and so for this next story, I don't know if you've seen this. This has been kind of circulating for the last week or two, but this is about the all-white establishment that's being created in Arkansas, and it's called the Return to the Land Initiative, and they're going to be located in the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas, and it's going to be a whites-only town. When I was watching the clip, the guy saying, no blacks, no Jews, no this, no that, just white people, white folks galore, right? And so some people thought that I was going to be offended about it. Can I be honest? Hell, y'all move on over there. Have a great time. And hopefully more of y'all go over there and build a gate and stay on up in there and get out of everybody else's way. And so when it comes to this, when I was looking at the research, and mind you, they're building this through donations, like the ringleaders on social media saying, hey, if you got some Bitcoin and everything, donate so we can keep building. Listen, honestly, I'm not dying on the hill to go live on the hill with those people. They can have it. And what's interesting is, I've always said this before because some people say, well, it's a conversation of segregation, so on and so forth. If we want to have that conversation, I'll entertain it when it gets to the point where if there's something that I'm paying taxes for and I'm told I can't be a part of it, that's when I want to shake the table. But if white folks want to go off in the middle of nowhere and build their establishment and live like the Waltons in 2025, go for it. Please be my guest. I promise you I will not. You don't got to worry about me ever interrupting anything y'all got going over there. As long as your existence does not intrude upon my livelihood, I'm good. So again, if y'all want to go over there and build whatever, go for it. Because if we're being honest, this is not some utopia that anybody with common sense will want to go to. Can we talk about the breakdown? Most likely, these are the bottom of the barrel white folks that are mad about their placement in life. Because honestly, when we're talking about white folks that actually are doing okay, that have a nice Wall Street job or have a nice tech job or whatever kind of job, and they're happy, they have a home, they have a nice car, they like their neighborhood, life is good, there's a Whole Foods down the street. You think they're giving that up to go live in the mountains and drink rainwater? And then when I was looking at the details, it's like, okay, so the men are going to do all the work, the women are going to watch all the kids and then do all the teaching. Who wants to go there? First of all, no disrespect to the kids are going to be dumb because they're not going to be in real school. They're not going to be learning anything because it's likely that what they're being taught is going to be a bunch of white nationalist nonsense. So the kids are already going to be slow and will not be able to contribute much to society when they become adults if they choose to leave the land, right? The poor women, based on the kind of ego and the attitude of these men, I feel bad because some of these women are probably getting knocked upside the head by these husbands, and now because there isn't a police force and they're trying to create their own little system of government, there's probably no kind of element for safety for some of these people, right? And so, again, I'm good. And the thing that I do find funny, I hope as they build this establishment, they build everything that they need. Because what's going to be real funny is somebody in that town is going to get sick. Their little herbal remedies and herbs and spices will not be able to fix what issue they have. And they're going to have to end up going to the county hospital, which, boom, here we go. Now, indirectly, as independent as you want it to be, your livelihood would still depend on the very people that you hate. Because guess who pays taxes so that you can have a hospital in the area? Everybody. That includes black people. That includes the Jewish people. That includes all these different groups. The lesbians that y'all got beef with, the Latinos, the Asian, everybody pays taxes so that there can be nearby hospitals and everything else. So even when you go over there with whatever infection you've gotten because you done got bit by something, your livelihood and your existence will still be at the hands of the very people that you hate. So enjoy that land. Good luck in the winter when it gets cold. I hope y'all know how to build some heat and everything. But I honestly don't care. I really don't care. It's just funny that they present this as a space that the rest of us want to be around. And I'm sure a lot of black folks in general don't care either. Listen, most of us just want to be left alone. And so my thing is this: if you want to go build your utopia of whiteness over there, great, stay over there. But please also stop intruding on my existence with your political views and your political beliefs. Because for some reason, you guys want to isolate, but then you still want to have control over other groups of people that you have no connection with and that you don't even live amongst. That's my beef more so. So enjoy your utopia of whatever y'all got over there. I know the food's nasty. Enjoy. Have fun. I really don't care. To end on a lighter note, I just wanted to share some of the things that I've been listening to musically that have kind of kept me entertained during the summer so far. I've really enjoyed the Tyler the Creator album. It is a little different, but what I like about it is the production value. As somebody who also makes music, I really enjoy when I hear a project that has a lot of effort when it comes to the production. So far, my favorite song on this album is I'll Take Care of You. Very different, very abstract, but it still kind of fits that brand of what Tyler's been doing. Like I said, he's kind of one of my favorite rappers that are, he's not even new anymore, to be honest. He's current, but he's also kind of transitioning into being a bit more seasoned because he's been out for a good minute. But I've really enjoyed his project. I really enjoyed the Jane Handcock album that's just come out. I've been following her since about 2019, and she too has a very, very nice project. I can also tell she's a big Anita Baker fan because on this album, she has a cover of Same Old Love, and she's also used the sample of Same Old Love on a different song called My Thing some years back. I want to say maybe that was on that same project from 2019, and so check that project out. It's actually a very nice listen. I've also really been enjoying the Act Infinity song. I discovered them based on people that just kept retweeting them on the social media platforms, and I went and dug into their catalog, and I was like, oh, these are actually kind of cool. They're kind of like a soft rock alternative group, but I've really enjoyed their project. So far, my favorite song. And mind you, their last album was in 2024. They have a few singles that they've dropped in 2025, but I've really enjoyed the song I Want You Back from their 2024 project. So yeah, those are just some of the projects that I've been listening to. Like I said, we'll pick up on the next live, which will likely be Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday. So I will see you guys then. Anyway, share your 2 cents. I'm out. Subscribe.